Good morning and good afternoon to you, wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you for joining us. For those who have just joined us for the first time, this webinar series is focused on HR and workplace topics with a lens of culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sustainability. I'm Sonia Sapaban, CEO of OurOffice, where we help organizations with the process, expertise, data, and technology you need to build a more inclusive workplace. Our end-to-end solution for workplace culture, diversity, and inclusion works especially well for small and medium organizations who want to focus on DEI, but maybe stretched too thin for time or resources. First, I want to thank David Turetsky, a pay equity expert and VP at Salary.com, and my colleague, Dr. Tiffany Ingram, for joining me to discuss this important topic. Welcome you both. We'll get to know them both a little bit better in a moment. But before we get into the meat of this conversation, let's make sure all of our audience is familiar with some logistics. I'm sure you all have used the Zoom webinar tool by now. Over the last couple of 3 years, we've all become technology experts. But I just want to mention that this is an interactive webinar. So we will have a few polls throughout to get your inputs as part of the conversation. Also, please note that the chat function is there to provide your comments. We also welcome questions throughout the webinar. You can put them in the Q&A. We also monitor the chat if you just put it in there. We have one of my colleagues at our office, Anushka Sarif, who will be moderating the questions in real time and chiming in as needed. So thanks in advance, Anushka. And we will answer as many questions as we can throughout and also at the end. But afterwards, if needed, as long as you provide your email address, we can also answer questions. Also, please note this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. Last but not least, the webinar is approved for both SHRM and HRCI recertification credits. You'll find the activity codes on the very last slide. All right, so with that, let's do a little bit of intros. Tiffany, Dr. Ingram, of course, we're colleagues at our office, and I'm delighted to have this webinar together. Can you share a bit about your background in diversity, equity, and inclusion so our audience gets to know you better?
Yes, good morning, everyone. And Sonia, thanks so much for letting me join in this panel discussion. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I'm Tiffany Ingram, Dr. Tiffany Ingram. We're working on that. But I will say that what really ties me to this diversity, equity, inclusion work is my dissertation, where I looked at the intersectionality of race, age, and gender as it relates to career advancement for African-American millennial women. And equal pay is wrapped up in all of this. Many of my research participants talked about being overworked and underpaid. And I think it is time that we have a discussion about this, not just for women, not just for women of color, but just really to get more insight from to support organizations and really solving the challenges of this in the workplace. My current role at our office helps connect the dots and support small and medium-sized organizations and creating an inclusive workplace environment for their employees. So I'm excited to be here this morning.
Thanks so much. I'm always in awe of your thoughtfulness and depth of analytical thinking about this topic and the related topics and how you work with our customers. And you make a really great point. This conversation is about what can you do about it, right? I mean, there'll be some about, of course, the background of it and everything, but especially with focus on small and medium organizations. A lot of times people think they're just, spread too thin, and that it is just what it is. They're doing their best. We're a small organization too, and we're just keeping our heads above water. But this is a really important topic for a variety of reasons that we'll just talk about. So let's go to David. David, we're delighted to have you with your wealth of expertise and experience. I'm like in awe of you too. And so would you give us a bit of your personal story of tell us your story. How did you end up in focusing on pay equity?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I have laryngitis today. I promise I tried to do some vocal exercises to clear it up. But my kind of beginnings in all of this came from my love for economics and for trying to drive a relationship between the contribution of an employee and the value of that employee to an organization not as an HR trend, but as a business issue, and seeing the employee for who they are, not just what they are, but how they're driving value for a company. So a lot of the research I've done in my 30 plus years as being a compensation practitioner, as well as being a consultant and a technologist in the HR space, is trying to help managers and leaders understand that these are all business decisions that we make. And to try and see people for their contribution to an organization, no matter what their gender, what their race, ethnicity, or other type of status, whether it's mental health or veteran status, and try and see beyond those things and try and see the person for the value that they bring. I'll say that a lot because what we try and do is we try and ascertain how the person contributes to the whole of an organization and how that brings value creation for the business, and how treating people right and treating people appropriately makes the organization better, makes the organization's culture more useful, and makes it more valuable for not only the employees, but also for the customers as well as shareholders. So a lot of what we do, especially at salary.com, is to try and make people see the value that people can bring when you pay them and treat them fairly.
I love that. I love that focus on the connection with the overall good of the business. Everybody really wins. And that's like when we first met, I knew that we completely connected on that when Tiffany and you and I talked together, because that's really where it comes together. There's many reasons for pay equity, for all kinds of equity, but really, whether or not to subscribe to many other, social justice or other aspects of it, and we're all, in business, to be successful and to be responsive to our various stakeholders. And that's where it really comes together. That's really good for everybody. But I must admit, David, I am, I hear, even though we're in this space, right? I mean, we are always working with our customers to help them see the trends and to see where some of the pay equity issues might start emerging and which groups of people. But when it comes to the detailed, like statistical analysis and the, when you talk about pay equity, there's many different definitions. And I must say, that's when we come to people like you and we partner with people like yourself and your organization to do a more detailed statistical analysis. But, there's been different components of pay. So what's a definition? What should we think of as, at least for the purposes of this conversation? How should our audience and ourselves, how should we think of pay equity? What do you, what's your definition?
That's a great question. So pay equity has lots of different facets. It goes beyond base pay. It goes to providing people opportunities, giving them opportunities to get promoted, giving opportunities to understand the career paths they can take and what training is available for them to see what fuller picture of their career could be outside of the lens that they actually get to see today. It also goes into how many hours do I work and am I offered overtime like my colleagues are? So it goes into other pay elements as well as time and workforce planning. Like, are you giving equally the opportunity for people to earn overtime by doing the overtime? Not just because Bob and Jane are both single parents, but you're going to defer to Bob because you think Bob might have somebody to watch his kids. That's wrong. And that's one of the things that we talk to people about. Stop thinking about the person and their situation at home. Divorce those two things. Think about the opportunities you're giving to people equally and make sure that you're providing them the opportunities available. So there's another thing here. So we talked about base pay. We've talked about career. We've talked about overtime. Think of also, and we've also talked about promotion, sorry. Also think about the way in which you've structured pay from a total rewards perspective. Think about the benefits you offer to people. And are you giving them the opportunity to be mentally healthy? Are you giving them the opportunity to be physically as well as financially healthy? So it goes beyond base pay, even though that's what a lot of pay equity focuses on, because it's a really big piece of what total rewards is. The real opportunity here is when we're talking about pay equity is treat people fairly and forget about all the other things, but ask them what they need from us and give it to them, listen to them, and hopefully treat them equally for all of those different pieces.
That's the other thing I really love about how you think about this. Not just because it's the same way we think about it, but because it really is how organizations must think about it in order to make progress, because often we have customers come to us and go, oh, we did this, did that, we pay them more. People still don't accept our offers, or they come and then they leave. Yeah. We can't keep them, right? And this is how it's showing up these days, right? In whether you call it, great resignation, or those who have stayed, quiet quitting, all these terms that are around. This is really the base reason is you have to look, it's a multidimensional problem, and you have to have this expansive definition of pay. It's more than just certainly your base pay, but even just the total dollars. One of the things we do is we help people score. We have analytics around scoring your benefits. How do you score benefits? Right. And how do you compare within your industry? Especially for small, medium organizations, it's very difficult because most of the metrics that are out there, or some information that's available, to the extent it's available, it's about larger organizations. So, what are my peers doing? How do I compete? And so we're going to talk a lot more about that. But before we do that, if you agree, I want to get a better understanding of how our audience is thinking about this, what's their level of understanding. So we're going to put up our first poll up. And in this poll, as you'll see, we're asking, think of your organization and rate it in terms of what you think is the level of understanding and progress in pay analysis and pay equity for all employees in your organization, given what we've just talked about. So we're going to give it just like 30 seconds or so. Please do participate if you're on this call. We really appreciate this. It's also recorded, so when people watch this later, I'll kind of call out the results of this kind of just real-time polling that we do here. I love this part always. I'm always excited, and a lot of times it comes out just how we expect it to be. So it's coming out right now as about half of the people, about 50% or so, say that they are aware. I am going to also put up a little bit of a definition of what our different definitions of these are, just if it helps maybe some people that haven't yet responded. So really aware is just, as the word says, right, is that you're aware of the benefits, right? And then focus is that you actually have some efforts going on. Progressive is when your efforts are starting to pay off. And of course, world class, you're going beyond your own organization. So the numbers that are coming out here are, and thank you for the participation, we see that about half of the people are in the aware stage, and only about less than 10% are focused, but about 30%, that's pretty good, is they're progressive. They believe in the organization around pay equity. And then we have even, about a few percentage in the work class. So that's great. I will say, just compare what we see normally, and Tiffany, please feel free to chime in. I think that we would see this is an exceptionally progressive group. I think we have on this audience. We'll see less progressive.
Yeah, more folks would definitely be in the range of aware, of just like, we know that we should do this. We know that it's important, but not yet have really taken action to be able to make those improvements and have detailed goals and objectives around pay equity for their organization.
Yeah. And so I agree with you. I mean, I think we see across now the several years that we've been doing these assessments, we see them in the aware and focused stage. Usually progressive is a little bit less. But again, the selection for this group, the groups that call into this types of webinars, it is a little bit biased towards the more aware and more progressive people. So we appreciate that. So we're going to just put up the results for a moment so you can kind of see it too here briefly on the screen. But this is how it's come out, and we're going to close it now. So with that, let us just now try and talk a little bit about the next part of this, right? Which is while there are many lenses of diversity, right? We have gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, disability, and so on. One dimension that we find, we have global customers, and so one that is really considered important around the globe, for obvious reasons, is that it's pay equity in terms of gender. Tiffany, I know you, as you mentioned, your dissertation was focused on intersectionalities and how they impact your progress. Would you like to share some of your data and insights just from your deep research on this?
Yeah, most definitely. I will share around the pay equity conversations that I had with my research participants were really more about a lot of what David talked about earlier and the access to opportunity. So for many young Black women that I spoke with, it was, I'm sitting in that same position that I have gotten right out of college. Maybe I've gotten a couple of raises, but hadn't really received that big promotion, really didn't even know what it took to get to that next promotion. Even with, and some people had support of their managers, but many of them did not. Managers were not able to help them navigate what the career ladder and structure looked like for their organization, what it meant to go from a program analyst to senior, maybe program analyst. It was almost kind of like a black hole of, I don't know what to do next. Right. For some other participants where they say, okay, I'm leaving this job, I'm going to another. The issue in navigating kind of that initial offer, right? And trying to figure out, should I take this offer or not? And knowing that there's bias that exists in that, and knowing that if you start lower than everybody else, you're never going to be on par with your coworkers. So many of my research participants also talked about being at a job and kind of looking left and right a few months after being there and realizing that they're making 20K less than, John or Bob. And a lot of people also talked about senior employees on the job saying, oh, you're young, you just need to wait it out, you haven't paid your dues. However, a lot of millennials are coming with a lot of student loan debt and a lot of debt that needs to be paid. So we do need those salaries to be able to pay off this college that everyone thought was supposed to be the golden ticket. Yeah. So particularly for women, we're seeing statistically, of course, we talk about these pay equity, gender equity days, that pay gap days, equal pay days that we have been acknowledging throughout this entire year. So it starts off in early May or April. We talk about women making 8 cents on a dollar in comparison to non-Hispanic white men. But for Asian women, that range is kind of like, 90 to 85% on the dollar. But for Black women, our equal pay day was just last week, and it's coming out that it's 63 cents on every dollar. So I have essentially had to work almost a year, and this is just to get to your 2021 rate, wages of non-Hispanic white men. And there are two more ethnic racial groups that still have not met the salary of what a white man was paid last year. Our Native women are at 60 cents a dollar, and our Latina community, their equal pay day is not until December. And theirs is about 55 cents on a dollar. So these are women who are working in roles, and this is like from full-time, women working full-time in the last year, right? This is not including like our part-time workers. These are women who are working full-time in jobs, and the gaps are enormous. And we can't even begin to think about what happens when women may want to take maternity leave and those supports that are available for them. So it seems as though this gap is widening, and a report from the Institute of Women's Policy Research says it'll take about to 2059 for women to get on par. This is just white women with the salaries of the non-Hispanic white male, but it's going to take for Black women 2119 to get that pay parity, and for Latinas even later. So that's 2224. We just can't even wait that long. No one can wait that long to really truly get to the pay equity that they deserve. These are women who are doing the exact same work for their male counterparts, but getting significantly less pay. So I really, really want to be able to have this discussion about how do we know this data points, right? Everybody knows the data points. It's on paper. We see what's happening with women of color here in America. What can organizations do to combat this? What can they do? We know it's wrong, but where do folks start is the question, in closing the gap in their organizations.
Yeah, it's that data is just just astounding, right? And we hear it every day, and we hear, of course, if you're a Latina or you're a Native woman or Black woman, that you have to work so much longer into the next year to make as much as a white man the last year, obviously sounds very wrong, right? But having said that, I think the other way to also think about it is that think of how much money we're leaving on the table in terms of taxes, in terms of these women, even their ability to stay in the workforce. We're all talking about how we're short in labor, like by millions of people in this country, right? But a lot of it is because if you look at the pandemic, concurrently, a lot more women have opted out of the workforce, in this great resignation, everything, simply because the pay just didn't make sense with everything that they had to pay others to take care of their kids or, their household chores and things like that. They just opted to stay home and just take care of it themselves because they're not being paid that much to make up the difference. So there is really a huge, really down side of this on the overall economy. And then on the companies, each of them organizations that are trying to hire people and they don't have enough people. There are all these women, sitting at home because they just can't. So think of the millions organizations are losing, every time people talk about, just the hourly wage or, the pay equity, and people go, oh, businesses can't afford it. Yes, but can you afford not having someone in the seat when you need them to do your work? So there's really the economic and the business aspect of this. And when you talk, and the roles, when you mentioned about the roles, having some input to people about the roles they should be taking. One of the things that, I'm an engineer. I was at NASA the first dozen or so years of my career. And I was really, really blessed with great mentors. But nobody told me that there's a big difference between functional roles, like just managing people and, basically cost centers, right? And having a P&L role, profit and loss role. I just stumbled upon one. I was lucky and I got into a P&L role. And then that grew. So the majority of my executive role was in a P&L role. And I also had functional background. But, a lot of times you see people in staff roles, they have great titles, right? You're VP of strategy or you have, but it's a staff role, it's a cost center, it's not a P&L, you're not interfacing with the customers, you're not interfacing with the investors. And so those kind of roles at the higher levels of the echelon, also women are just not mentored and they're not told to focus on those things. And then once they leave, like I would have never ended up sitting on public boards if I didn't have P&L background. I mean, that's like an absolute must for a board.
Absolutely.
So David, yeah, let me let you jump in here. Sounds like you're ready. We're giving your voice a little a little rest in between, but please jump
Thank
in.
you. Well, and what Dr. Ingram was saying is so disappointing because, as I've said publicly in the media recently, there are no bargains. You cannot hire someone for a bargain. You're cheating that person and the company out of a very valuable resource if you try and hire them as a bargain, because eventually when they find out that they've been hired for less than their peers, they're gonna sue you and you're gonna lose. So why bother paying them less than what they should be paid? Why not pay them exactly what they are owed and make sure from the beginning that you're embracing them, you're treating them fairly, and you're giving them the opportunities like you're talking about, Sonia, that they not only deserve, but they also could be the best leader possible for that next role. They could be the best resource for that role. So it doesn't make any sense to me. And that's what I've said this very publicly in lots of different forums, that treat people fairly, be transparent about your pay practices, be transparent about what the going rate is for that job that you're hiring, and make sure that the people who are taking the role understand what it takes to get from what their starting compensation is to the next level. I don't just mean the next paycheck. I don't mean the next promotion. I mean the next increase cycle, the next opportunity. Give them the tools that they need, whether it's skills they need to develop, whether it's performance issues that they're having. Give them the tools they need to make mature business decisions, to be able to understand what it takes to get that P&L responsibility that you were talking about, Sonia, or that understanding about getting access to mentors who can provide that expertise. There's no reason that there has to be race, ethnicity, and gender lines on that. Everybody should have access to that equally. And so it kind of pains me when we talk about those gaps that Dr. Ingram was talking about. It drives me nuts because we should be encouraging and developing all of our team and not worrying about other things that might get in the way that actually, to be honest, we need to take into consideration, whether it's paternity leave or maternity leave. Those are equal, and we should be celebrating that with that person and not making them rue the day that they have kids. Embrace those people and be able to make sure they understand that when they come back, not only will they be stronger for the opportunity to have left and come back, but also that we're going to be there and not take it into consideration in promotions or opportunities or other things. Sorry,
Yeah.
I get a little passionate.
I
The throat's killing me on it.
No, I love it. I love it. And as you're speaking, of course, you know, can agree with you more. And ignorance is not bliss, right? I mean, I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, we asked them how much they made before and we gave them a little bit more. But when you look at how much they were paying a similar non-Hispanic man, for example, you know, in their organization, it was a lot more. Well, that's not, you know, it's not the way to go about it. And I do also hear, and we'll talk about this in a moment, you know, about the small, medium organizations saying, you know, we just can't afford it, you know, we're going to go out of business. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But before we do that, so there's really great reasons we've talked about, you know, the overall economy, the good of your own company, just having people in the seats, having people that are really engaged. There's a lot of issues with engagement more than ever. There's a lot of productivity loss due to it. The relationship between engagement, belonging, and productivity is clearly there. So like we say, there's no bargains. You get what you pay for, basically, I think is the adage here. But let's find out about the reasons for our audience. You know, they've tuned in today. So let's just ask really quick and see in our second poll here. So in the second poll, we're asking, you know, what's the main reason for your organization's interest in pay equity? If you're not sure about your organization's interest, just put in your own interest. You know, why did you basically call into this webinar? You know, you could just think of it that way. So we have several options here. External focus on the topic. External, by the way, in our case, we include the board and you know, your customers, investors, other people having focus on this. Current employee concerns that have come up. Maybe somebody has recently sued you, or you're worried that they're going to sue, or they've just been leaving because of it. Business benefits and cost savings. Maybe you're aware of that, and you understand things that, for example, David was just talking about. And then CU and board focus. Oh, sorry, we did actually break out CU and board focus here. So external focus is really completely external here. On that first one, I misspoke. And so
Sonia, Sonia, may I suggest that if other could be legislation?
Yes, 100%, absolutely.
Because there's a lot of legislation about it right now, especially our friends in California.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's part of it as well. And so there is a lot. Yeah, we are. I mean, some of us. I'm headquartered actually in Los Angeles, so that's we certainly have every day new things coming up. So let's just give it another few seconds. We see the numbers are coming in. And we see the external focus is around, we have about 8%, current employee concerns, 42%, wow. And that's, you know, a good number. Business benefits and cost savings, we see 0% on that yet. Nobody has put that in yet. And then we have CEO board focus, also about 33%. So that's usually around that. I'm not surprised with that. And then there's other reasons about 17%. But again, the business benefits are apparently not appreciated, enough by everyone in terms of it being really a key reason for doing this. I really think it's the strongest reason, actually, the way I think about it. So that's really interesting input.
If you don't mind, Sonia, I think we should probably address that current employee concerns. And Jaime Pisano had a question which kind of touches on this, which is the thoughts on posting salary ranges as a way to promote equity. Mm-hmm. If you don't mind us covering that now.
Yes, absolutely. Let us go to that. So let us end the poll here. So we're going to close it again. It ended up the same. About the largest numbers are 42% current employee concern and 33% CEO and board focus.
So touching on that current employee concerns, pay equity is obviously on a lot of people's minds, especially as Dr. Ingram was saying, but for people of color, for people who are in the groups that have been traditionally underpaid, this is this is something that's occupying their mind. Like, if I look to the left and I look to the right, am I that person, right? That's underpaid. And so the thing about transparency is it does promote equity because it gives everybody a mature understanding. And I use that word very carefully, a mature understanding of how much this job should be paid. Mm-hmm. If you're posting externally for my job, but you don't tell me how much that job is paid by talking to me about it, and I look and I see that that job is posted on the web, and I see a pay range and I'm below that range, what's the first thing that I'm going to do? I'm going to get mad. I'm going to get disappointed. I'm going to go talk to my boss about what is up. I'm going to go talk to my HR leader and say, this is completely unfair. And my head is going to explode. So the concept of pay equity is you have to train people internally first before you start posting ranges externally. And SB 1162 in California just got passed, where it's now mandated that a company in 2023 is going to have to post their ranges for medium and large size businesses. I think smaller are excluded from this right now. But you're going to have to post ranges. But before you do that, sorry for the bee in your face, but before you do that, you have to talk to your people internally, your leadership first, then your managers, and then the staff, to tell them what's going on. You need to do a review yourself, because if you find that you're paying someone below the ranges that you're posting, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
You also need to talk about what's the concept of fairness. And Dr. Ingram, you were talking before about those compensable factors that go into, why are people paid differently, right? There are reasons, there are some valid reasons, but people just shouldn't take it on faith that they know what those reasons are. You need to train people to have mature conversations about that. Dr. Ingram.
I think that is the issue, right? Like the communication part of it. Even in negotiating for a new job, it's just like, well, why can't we get this? It's like no response. Even when you're negotiating for a promotion internally at your organization, is, well, what is the rhyme or reason behind hiring? And people are like, oh no, HR said we can't do it. Right. Or, it's this or it's that. It's people who I know work in budget and know that there is money in the budget, but they're telling people, no, you can't get paid. This is someone else. It seems a lot of passing the buck within the organizations. And I think it's because people do not know how to have conversations about money and how they make like compensation decisions. It seems like there's no rhyme or reason. It's just like throwing out numbers, almost like the lottery, almost like Oprah. You get a car, you get a car, because no one knows. And everyone is ducking and dodging the conversation.
And that's why I was talking about having the communication start from the leaders, teaching the leaders how this works. Then they can help you teach their direct reports and their managers and so on, so that there is a cascading of understanding of how things work. So you can't just go to the boss and say, hey, I want to do this or I want to do that, and it gets done. It's a mature set of conversations happen from the top down. So everybody understands. Everybody is fundamentally understanding, why are we doing this? For our culture, for our people, for our business efficacy. We need to make sure everybody's on board so they don't pass the buck. So they don't go, this is what HR did, or this is the reason, or I don't have the budget. That's all baloney. They need to understand what they can do and can't do, what they can say and can't say, who they can blame and they can't blame. And they have to have mature reasons. You have to give them the scripts. You have to give them the balance sheet. You have to help them understand how all of these decisions impact people and how it impacts the business. So Dr. Ingram, I totally agree with everything you just said.
So, this is where there's both a huge challenge and also an opportunity, a really significant opportunity, I really think, for the majority, like vast majority, 90% plus of all employers in this country and globally, which is small, medium organizations. The challenge is obvious. We're a small company ourselves. I know that you probably talk to people like us all the time, and even in your own background experience, right? When you have a few hundred employees and you're doing well, even if like we're growing very fast, but still, we're struggling, right? There's so many priorities, and especially today, with all of these new laws and things coming out about who can go back to work, hybrid work, inflation, shipping concerns and supply chain, all kinds of things, right? So it sounds just like really an insurmountable set of challenges already. And on top of it, I got to be intentional about pay. I got to find out all these things. I got to have all these scripts. I got to, make sure that I find out exactly, how to do this and structure and set it up right. So help us talk a little bit to specifically, the challenges and how they can overcome, how small, medium organizations can address this, idea of pay equity so that they can do the right thing. They can also be able to brand themselves as a really fair and equitable employer, which is the opportunity side of it, right? I mean, you can't compete on the perks with, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world and or some of the larger other organizations. But it is really true that most, especially millennials and Gen Z, who are already 50% of the workforce, are going to be 75% of the workforce by 2025.
Sure.
They really prioritize this stuff. So that's the opportunity also in terms of hiring and retaining the best talent, is to really be serious about this. And it just amazes me how much it's missed and how much people don't pay enough attention to it, especially in small. It's like, we can't afford to do this. And I'm like, but you can't afford not to, actually, because this is the biggest way you can differentiate yourself. And there are ways to do it that won't break the bank and can still stay in business.
Absolutely. Well, don't forget, if they get sued because they're not paying fairly, that will certainly break the bank, right? So I like to use the ostrich principle. You cannot hide. You cannot put your head in the sand and think this is going to go away. It's not. This is here to stay. People demand to be paid fairly. As Dr. Ingram said, this is not something that's just one group or two groups. This is a gigantic proportion of our working world, and we have to pay them fairly. And so the best thing you can do is start. And what I mean by that is there are processes out there. Salary.com has a 6-step process, which we call the Plunkett Pay Equity Framework. It's free to download. There's no obligation. I don't get paid to say that. Probably did, but just to be honest. But it's a framework. It's available to you. It basically says this: start with your leadership. Talk to your leadership about doing the right thing and making pay equity a focus from the CEO and the board to every level of the organization. Make them buy in, because if they don't buy in, none of this is happening anyways. So if you're the owner of a business or the leader of a business and you're on this podcast, you're on this webinar, you made the first step to getting there, right? Congratulations. Mm-hmm. So get your leaders to buy in. The second step is to do the analysis, to start looking at the people inside your organization and understand, do we have gaps? And I'm talking now about, if you look at what people do, look at their job descriptions, but look at what people really do. Make sure that you understand what people actually do. Because when you go to set up your cohorts to do the analyses to say, I have 2 jobs that it should be paid fairly and similarly, and they're not, and one's white male dominated, non-Latino, and another one is a person of color or women of color, then what you have to do is you have to make sure you understand the reasons why and fix it and have a budget to fix it. So that's next step. And then the other one is do your external market analysis. Make sure you're paying everybody fairly around the organization, regardless of who or what they are. Make sure you're paying for what they should be doing. So all of these go then to making a statistical analysis to see, doing the Rubik's Cube, to keep turning and turning and turning to see if I'm paying fairly based on gender. Am I paying fairly based on race? Am I paying fairly based on ethnicity? Am I paying fairly based on mental abilities? Am I paying fairly based on disabilities or veteran status or other things? Keep twisting the Rubik's Cube so you can find those disadvantaged groups and make sure that you can fix it. You won't be able to fix everything right away, but have a good conversation with your leaders in finance to say, this is our gap. This is our statistically valid gap. And here's what we are going to do about it. And then, as Dr. Ingram said, communicate, 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 keep communicating, keep telling people, this is why we're doing this. This is what we're doing. And these are the reasons. Sorry.
No, I love that. I love that. I want to focus on or emphasize a couple of points. I mean, obviously you made great points all along. The first one is to the communication one that you mentioned at the beginning and at the end, and Tiffany has also mentioned, by providing a safe environment, a culture where people can come forward and tell you if they feel like they're not paid, fairly. With very small organizations, we work with organizations that have sometimes less than 50 employees even, right? And so they just can't even, their mind, like their head blows up, if you're talking about statistical analysis, right? So they have to start somewhere, right? And we always say, the easiest thing, actually, the very first thing is, first what you said, talk to your leadership, make sure they're in sync with this, but because if you don't get that, you're not going anywhere. But then find out, have an environment, have a safe environment. We have in our product, we have a safe environment. It can be anonymous. People can ask questions. It's done very professionally. It's not just for that, but it can be used for people raising concerns about, sometimes people have said, we had one where an LGBTQ person came out anonymously, right, at a company where they had very little conversation. It was very conservative company in an industry and location where they just didn't talk about these things. And right, so they asked, they said, how are our benefits about, why don't we have benefits for same-sex partners? And the leadership of the company told us, they called us, they were so proud of themselves later on, and as they should have been. And they said, we thought about it because we thought about removing this post, from the feed, because they have the ability to do that, of course. But they said, but then we decided to meet and we thought about it. And they said to me, their VP of HR said, so you always talk to us about transformation, and we kind of roll our eyes a little bit, we believe you, but we hadn't experienced it before. And he said, in this instance, when we had this meeting and we really talked about it, we said, what, this is going on. And if we don't answer it, sure, we can remove it, but that's like a, short-sighted kind of a solution, and it'll probably backfire. So they decided to address it. And when they looked at it, they actually did have benefits, by law, because, as of 2015, if married couples get the same rights, right? So they addressed it, and they actually answered on the platform to this anonymous post. And they said, we actually do have benefits for same-sex married couples. We don't have it for partners, as we don't have for partners even in, heterosexual partners, So when they answered that, it's really amazing. So he told me, he said, so we had transformation at the leadership level that decided to actually deal with it, because from the beginning they had said, we just don't want to hear about this kind of diversity, right? We're okay with gender and people of color, but not the other kinds. And then after that, once they responded on the platform, it's a safe environment. The person who had asked the question was a woman. She came out with her name and she thanked the company. She said, I still get chills when I think about this. This instance, it happened at the very beginning when we actually had our product out. They were actually a pilot customer about 5 years ago. And then, they came out and they said, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I didn't know it. Thank you for informing me. And then after that, a whole host of people from the company came out and started posting and responding and reacting, with thumbs up and likes and so on. So they really experienced this moment of transformation where this transparency and communication that they had available to the organization made them aware. So there's a question actually says our organization is currently working on pay equity by restructuring our wages. I would love to see if there's anyone who specializes to help lead us in creating long-term pay equity structure. Are there any suggestions? So the suggestions are, first, before you even go looking for somebody to do the pay equity, talk to your leadership, provide a transparent environment. And then in terms of help, what we provide is before you even go into statistical analysis, is just trends analysis, right? So you can see groups of people compared to each other. So groups of, people of color, groups of all of the diversity categories we talked about, veterans, age, disability, sexual orientation, and so on. So you can see where these gaps are at a broader level. You can see throughout your organization, the different disciplines, the different standard operational codes or your departments. And then once you decide, here's an area, there's some pay equity, it seems, in engineering with women, for example, right? Like some specific area. That's when you want to get focused on some level of statistical analysis. And then, of course, David has talked about salary.com, and there's, I'm sure, other resources. We don't particularly recommend one or the other, but we do obviously. I can. Yeah, we do. No, we do give it. Obviously, we do provide. To our customers, we provide recommendations directly. That's one of the things we do. But to help them with any other services and products that they need to have a holistic, solution to their DEI.
But Sonia, I think Ms. Yang was talking about long-term incentives and equity. Not just pay equity, but long-term incentives.
100%.
And that's something that I think it's a brilliant thing to ask the question about, because what we've seen and what I talked about before about opportunities, right? We've seen a lot of opportunities for a lot of different roles to get access to long-term incentives and to get access to equity. But there are a lot of groups, especially people of color, who have not been as receiving of those grants. And I think if we looked at the statistics, we'd probably be really not shocked at all, which is awful. But we can help you do that as well. And as you also said, Sonia, there are a lot of organizations that can help you go through, not just on base pay analysis, but also on total reward, including long-term incentives.
Yeah, you make a great point. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. Like, what's your bonus structure? What cut do you get out of if your company does well this year?
Right.
Making sure that that's equitable as well. But I think for people who are maybe just starting out, of just like salary ranges. Somebody asked about that. Like, what are our thoughts? At least posting like, this is our range for your program analyst. We are paying between 45 and 65 or 55. Like, is that a good thing to promote at least more transparency? I feel like our conversation has been a lot around transparency of organizations. Is that something that's okay? At least ranges, people know what to apply for and what not to apply for if it's out of what they want to be paid. And I think because a lot of times job titles and pay don't always align. You can be assistant director of something and you click it and the range says $35,000. So any other thoughts, David, I would say about salary ranges and posting those things. In some states it's required, it's not required in every state. So I would love your thoughts on that.
I would say do it. What's the harm in doing it? We always get to that awkward stage of the interview where someone says, so what's your expectations around pay? Well, why don't you tell me what the salary range is for that? How many people know and are trained, Dr. Ingram, to ask that question? It's rare. I mean, we don't teach this in high school. We don't teach this in college about what a pay structure is or how to think about the minimum, midpoint, maximum. So why not post it? What harm does it do? If you haven't done that communication throughout your organization, I promise you, doing that will not harm your world. It's a maturity factor. We're not in 1990 anymore. People have the internet. They have access to this data. They can look on the postings from California, New York, or Colorado and see what these jobs are getting posted for. Your state will have it soon, I promise. So I agree with you, Dr. Ingram. Post the range.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to, obviously, I 100% agree with the two great experts we have with us. I'll just ask a simplistic question. Why are you not posting it? I mean, just think about your personal life, right? I mean, the things we don't share about ourselves. We share the things we're proud of. So when you're not sharing it, there must be a reason. Sometimes it's just because we're not used to doing it. But if you ask your question and you say, there's not really a good reason why we're not, there's just that, we haven't been doing it. You come to the conclusion that, like David said, there's no harm in it, so let's do it. That's one thing. But if you say, we're not sure if it's really up to par, maybe not enough people will apply.
Right.
If there's reasons like that, then there's a red flag to say, well, we should be looking at this, right? I mean, what do you think about that?
Dr. Ingram.
I just feel like it's just like going to a restaurant, right? You go to a big seafood restaurant and the crab cake is on there for market price. That means any day you're going to get any amount of money in response of how much this costs. And it almost shows that there is no transparency in the organization. You may get any price in any day when you have an interview with someone because there is no structure. I think it shows, I don't know why people won't post, because it will help inform the applicants of what they actually really want to apply for. I don't want to apply for a $30,000 job. So if I knew that on posted that that's what it was the rate which you're willing to pay for that role, I won't apply. I feel like posting salary ranges helps to give a good insight to what is expected for that role and what that salary range will be. And it takes out the guessing work. I know people have literally hired negotiation coaches when they got their job because they were so fearful of being, catching the short end of the stick, particularly my friends who work in tech. Like, she got a huge job at an amazing tech corporation, but it's fearful that she was going to be underpaid because she was not prepared for the salary negotiation.
Right.
So she literally had to hire someone to do that. So I think it's important to be transparent.
That's a great point, is that people are getting smarter, right? If you don't provide these things, people will go get somebody to help them, or they'll find out. And then, you talked about litigation a couple of times, David. Actually, I think small organizations are under the false impression, or maybe just they just are not aware that most of the litigation is against larger companies, and that's just simply not true. Actually, the majority of the litigation is actually against smaller organizations, and I would say that that's, in any case, that shouldn't be your main fear. I think the main fear these days should be people just leaving you, or if they're there, staying there and not doing, more than just the minimum. In a lot of jobs, that's hard to even know if they're doing their best or not, right? So I think that's just the real reality of it. I want to make sure and see if I can sneak in one more poll. So if we can just quickly do this one, we have a couple more charts here, a couple more topics rather, to talk about, and we're going to try and slip them in here, but we will finish on time. So here is about the challenges, because again, we're talking about small, medium organizations. We're laser focused on what the challenges are and how we can help. So what are some of your key challenges in making progress in pay equity? Maybe you've been talking about it for some time, but it's still not going anywhere. So I see the results are coming in terms of, okay, limited resources, 67%, but as we've talked about it, think about it, right? Because even if you have limited resources to go do a pay equity analysis, or do look at these trends and kind of understand if there's some emerging gaps, think of the cost that you will incur if you don't do it, right? So the cost of not doing it is really pretty high. It's just that it's not as immediate, and so it's not as appreciated. As humans, we don't appreciate longer term risks, right? And issues. We just always are thinking, we just are wired to do that, right? For survival purposes, to think of just this moment or next moment. Some are talking about lack of alignment on criticality of pay equity at leadership level. That is, I think, as David has said, one of the most serious issues. And then lack of communication on how managers talk about salary, which also David has addressed. And so, yeah, these are all real issues. So let's just give it a couple of more seconds. Do you want to say anything more about that? So we have about 22% lack of alignment, 67% limited resources, and another 22% about lack of communication.
Those are the big three. I mean, that's usually what kills pay equity in companies. Small, mediums, or big. If you don't have alignment, you always will have limited resources, and not being open and honest about pay and pay practices with managers. Those three will always kill pay equity.
Yeah, 100%. No, I really appreciate that. And so, so you can all see those results. We do have another question coming in actually here. It says, I'm wondering how many organizations have gone through the exercise of career leveling and reevaluating the current job descriptions. How would you go about updating job descriptions?
Oh my goodness. After the pandemic, most job descriptions have been completely what is the word? They're old. I mean, they don't work anymore, right? I mean, if you look at what people do now, right? And so we've been doing a lot of work with organizations, updating job descriptions, and then updating the market pricing for those jobs, and being able to create new salary structures or create new cost structures around them. If you go back and you don't look at your job descriptions, then you're basically not paying people based on what they do. So a lot of organizations are looking at why and how they pay people by looking first at the content of their responsibilities and the skills needed to solve that problem.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's really important. And you bring up, what's happened, right, with the hybrid. Maybe a couple of minutes again here as we have left here is, can we speak to hybrid work and how that's impacting pay in general? You talk about job descriptions changing. I mean, there's a lot that has happened in the last couple, 3 years. But how's that impacting like the disparity between those who are in the office and remote workers? I mean, some people actually think it's a positive for the remote workers. Some people think it's a positive for the people in the office for a variety of different reasons. Each side has their own perspective, right? But in terms of pay equity, how do you see that? How is it impacting things?
I think I'll start by saying I don't know if we know what the true impact of pay equity is yet. I think that because there was a groundswell of momentum behind pay equity before the pandemic, and if you remember, when we were talking about like late 2019, early 2020, we were thinking that there was going to be a tremendous amount of legislation and support for moving forward with more aggressive pay equity legislation and changes to rules, especially when reporting, that the pandemic kind of put some of that stuff to the side because it was this focus on survival instead of pay.
Yeah.
But it's still there. And thank God a lot of the legislatures have been pushing forward on the pay equity processes and reporting requirements. So to be honest, I think that hybrid versus the in-person work hasn't done as much change as the momentum behind pay equity. But it's early days still. We're still not back at work, quote unquote. We're still at home for most of us. So I think this story is still being written. What do you think, Dr. Ingram?
I would say, I do see overall the impact of like, we don't know what's really how COVID has impacted our world of work until someone will write their dissertation about it in like 10 years. But I will definitely say, for one, I think there's a lot of stories coming out about people of color liking working at home because they don't have to worry so much about different microaggressions and things that they face in the workplace when they were there 100% of the time. And some of the kind of overall racist remarks that people may get in more conservative organizations where they may be whether the only woman, the only person of color, or both, only person of color and woman. I think in addition, I think it makes it hard for like salary negotiations because people always want to know, well, where do you live? And I know some people who have really struggled with that. It's like, okay, are you living in Michigan? Are you living in Kentucky? Are you living? And the cost of living looks different in every state. So I think it makes salary negotiation even harder for someone who previously lived. I lived in DC for the last 2 years and now I live in Houston. Cost of living is different. But everything with inflation has gone up. But a lot of people often base your compensation off of your location. But when you're in a 100% remote environment, how do you navigate that? And I think that's just the next level that's tricky for employees. And I think employers haven't, again, gotten their language together, their communication together about how to navigate those salary discussions.
That's a
Yeah, we just had
separate
the
topic
last.
for a webinar.
It is. It definitely is. We have some more questions that we haven't been able to answer. I'm so sorry. We could talk about this forever, especially with these two great guests that we have on this. But I do want to put up the recertification credits here, the codes for it. So please take note of these if you can take advantage of them. We are here to help you. You can always email us at DEI@OurOffice.io. We'll connect you with David and Tiffany as needed to answer other questions. I can't thank both of you enough. I've learned so much on this. I've had so much fun, and I look forward to doing this again. And you did great. Thank you. Thank you, David. You did great with your voice. Thank you for hanging in there.
Thank you.
Go get a tea with some lemon in it.
I'm going to.
Feel better soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.